Welcome to the Redhead Reveal Podcast. I am Jenn Pinkerton, your Redhead host, a psychotherapist, high-performance coach, writer, and speaker. As a connection expert, I help people reveal their connectedness within relationships, transforming from the root causes of beliefs and behaviors that hold them back from thriving in life. Let's talk about how you're thriving. All right, I'm excited today to welcome Stephanie Quayle, who wrote Why Do We Stay? And Stephanie, Nashville recording artist to renowned author. What is that? Tell us about this journey you've been on.
You know, a song is 3 minutes long and usually, maybe even 3 minutes and 30 seconds, right? And there's so much interpretation that happens with a song. You know, the songwriter, we write it with the hopes of what we hope, right? Yes. And then the listener interprets it and puts it into their own lives. Like I have a gajillion times with this book, it is what is written. There's no room for interpretation. And I think, you know, it's my, my story and my true account. And I think the thing about that is it's wild to see so many people relating to a story that feels so personal. And also how many people, women and men, that are going through a part of this story.
You know, but toxic relationships, I think that, you know, years ago, there wasn't as much of an acknowledgement of that. And now for someone to be bold enough and brave enough, like you, to be courageous enough to put your story out there, which, you know, it's painful narrative and situation that you experienced, but how helpful to other people to have that normalized, to know that somebody's not alone and to understand these signs of what to look for. You know, your book specifically highlights these red flags, these things that if you're seeing this, you might need to do some inventory of what's going on here. And I think that it's so helpful for people to be able to see that in a very clear, concise way and to feel like they can relate to, here's somebody as successful as you know, also was in this situation, that this could happen to you. It could absolutely happen to somebody else.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I also, on the flip side of that, you know, if someone like me after all this can still find love, then anyone can find love.
Yes, it's a happy ending. There's a happy ending there too.
Absolutely. It's very much a redemptive story. And I think, you know, I've spent so much time reading other people's work on, you know, if it's been in the self-help space or different books that are, you know, for marketing and promote all these different things. And I think what Keith, Dr. Keith Campbell does such a good job of marrying both the story with the actual information to create a roadmap. Because when I was in my early 20s, in my teens, I had no whereabouts, right? I had no book, no like, hey, here's what's going to happen when you make friends, when you have, you know, different relationships within your family dynamics, as well as, you know, these romantic relationships, which, you know, I was so susceptible. I see it now, so like flashing red lights, you know, because I just wanted to believe in people's potential so badly versus like what was right in front of me.
Right. And so what was right in front of you? What is it that you can give us a short snapshot for people who haven't read the book yet, but I know they're going to after hearing you talk about this? What were some of these immediate things that you felt like you saw that you just, you know, it just went right past it? But looking back now upon reflection, these were really big signs.
These are really big signs. I think one of the things that was the biggest sign for me, that had I just trusted myself and my gut and my intuition, when I felt like something was off, something was off. When I questioned something because something didn't add up, it's because something didn't add up. I wasn't insecure and I wasn't crazy, but those words were weaponized against me to just shut me down. So I was never, in those moments, I just froze and I started questioning myself versus going, no, wait a second. Where your time frames aren't adding up, or where you said you were, or that conversation you just had with that other woman right in front of me. These are all very, you know, vibrant signs of things not to do. And yet I overrode my own system. And, he was, in the case of my book, my first relationship that I talk about, he's very charismatic and he was very magnetic and people just were drawn to him. So I think I wrote off a lot of his behavior just because of his likability and his personality versus really, drilling down on what he was actually up to and following through with myself.
And that is such a very common theme when you're talking about relationships that have these, laced with this narcissistic traits or full-on narcissistic personality disorder. When you're talking about trauma bonds, when you're talking about unhealthy and toxic relationships, most often there are these common themes of that type of personality, of that type of image, of what you see on the surface, which does not match what is underneath. And I love what you said, that you weren't insecure. Because a lot of people think that for someone to be in a relationship like that, you had to be this very insecure, lack of sense of self type person that was attracted to that. But in fact, it is almost always that type of dynamic that you find those people come together. And you mentioned, the gaslighting. The thing is that just because someone says it doesn't make it true. But it's so easy to believe that hook, line, and sinker when you're in that type of relationship.
It really, now with the information that I have, I think back to that 20-something-year-old, and I just would so love to go back and give her a hug and say, and that's my main purpose for writing this book, is really the hope that it gets in hands of enough young people, especially that haven't maybe gone through this yet to this, gosh, I hope never to my extent, but just to have the tools and the framework and the terminology, like you said, we never talked about this stuff.
Right.
I think the first time I even heard narcissist was in the last handful of years. Really not being just a flippant term that, referencing someone that was being a bit of a jerk or whatever, like actually, toxic and gaslighting and love bombing and grooming and all these terms that we are around and are experiencing, but might not know how to identify. And I'm hopeful that my story can be that for others. And then that gives them time back. That, those years I lost, I'll never get those back. So this is kind of like, okay, this is my extension of my purpose to give time back to others.
Take that experience and be able to allow someone to look at it through a very different lens, from the lens you have of the history you have. This was 13 years ago, right? Or back up when it went.
When I wrote the book, yes, it was 15, January 28th.
Mm-hmm. And, this silence of this story for a while. And then now here you are coming out with that.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a shock to the system, to my own system. So I can only imagine as from my public facing standpoint, when I first put out the album On the Edge, people were really just not confused, but like, wait, what? Like, you've been walking through this life, this career with all of this going on behind it. And, first and foremost, it was protecting a young woman. This was her dad.
Right.
And, really understanding that the dynamics of our relationship are what they were, but that was her dad. Like, there's no, I'm very protective and about anything to do with her.
Sure. And a delicate balance for you to be able to juggle what you knew would help so many people, and what probably was very cathartic for you to be able to write on your own healing journey, for sure too.
Yeah, I think it's the greatest gift we can give ourselves is to go to our dark places. Go pull up the rug, open the closet with all the skeletons, and just look at it really honestly. It's not fun, but it's uncomfortably life-giving.
But let's stay with that for a second, because I feel like so often when it comes to even, therapy as a psychotherapist, getting people to understand that, yeah, it is temporary discomfort
Sure.
to go in and look at those dark places and expose that and work to heal and be on that healing journey. But it can be a permanent lifetime of feeling so much better and looking at life so very differently.
1,000%. I'm getting to experience now the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And where I'm experiencing it the most is in my internal relationship with myself and the relationship I have with my husband. We've been married almost 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he's getting to see the transformation from his point of view.
Right.
I'm getting to experience from the healed point of view. And I even said to him, I'm like, you get like a do-over, or I get a do-over for sure, but like we get a do-over from the standpoint of, I think if he were sitting here right now, he would say, yeah, I knew there was still more that had to be healed and rectified, but that's something you can't force someone else to do.
Right.
And he's extremely patient with that. And so for him to recognize it in me is really special. The freedom that I have now with that understanding. And, I said this the other day, being uncomfortable is like the ultimate pain reliever. Even though it doesn't feel good, like you said, in that discomfort and that just like, but the eventuality is pain relief.
Mm-hmm. Leaning in when it's hard. But
Yeah.
now you get a chance to show up so differently in relationships, to show up, to have a very different way that you probably manage your emotions and your feelings. Your boundaries change. You understand what is healthy and what isn't. You have a very different framework of how to function in a healthy way in a relationship.
Yeah, it really makes me look at everything through a much slower lens.
So what obstacles or setbacks do you think you experienced in this healing journey of rebuilding and writing? And tell me about that.
I think the biggest setback was not recognizing the trauma and recognizing I needed help, that this was not a one-woman show. After, when he died in that plane crash, as you read in the book, there were 5 days between grief, which I don't even think I properly did any grieving because I was just in shock and adrenaline and all the things that come with a tragedy like that. And then discovering that I wasn't the only woman. So I just went into mode of I am going to push through and I am going to get over it and move on and watch me, here I go. And that kind of just, bull in a china closet attitude. And it was just very, it compounded the pain because I didn't address it. So in hindsight, and now having gone through so many different, from therapy to grief counseling, just knowing that had I jumped into that discomfort immediately of really addressing all the layers from loving someone and losing someone, grief is grief is a different deal. And unless you've experienced grief, you can't tell anyone how it's going to look, and everyone is different. It's just the wildest experience. So that's, really why I fell into then that next toxic relationship, because I didn't do the work in between. And so I had repeater syndrome, right? I had a bad picker. And then as I navigated it and found my way to grief counseling and support counseling and what I call emotional rehab, working with psychologists and really understanding what was it in me that was, I was the common denominator, right?
Well, that's what I wanted to say. It's not that you have a bad picker. There is no such thing as the bad picker. It's that we repeat what we don't heal.
Yes.
Number one. And number two, there are things in us, our own traumas that are unresolved that make us very attractive to people. Like what you're describing. And it makes us want that type, we fall prey to that because there's parts that are so familiar. There's wounds that are familiar. And it's really an unbelievable dance if you witness that type of relationship of what happens. And it's so unhealthy, but yet at the time it's impossible to see.
I loved what you just said. You repeat the trauma you don't heal.
Yes, we will
That
repeat.
needs to be a dang t-shirt.
Actually, I do have that on some t-shirts.
Do you really?
Yes.
I need that t-shirt. Yeah, no, it's really something. And the trickle down effect of how it impacts friendships and business relationships. And what I discovered about myself was I was easily emotionally manipulated when, especially in my business, when I hadn't done the work. And so again, that susceptibility of repeating those,
Right.
trauma errors.
And when you go and you dive into some therapy, you dive into doing that emotional work and you recognize, what did I experience in my attachment when I was younger that has caused me to look at life through this lens, to be attracted to this type of person, to not recognize love bombing, to not understand gaslighting, to actually, buy into what's being sold to me, basically. And there's a reason that happens. And it doesn't mean anything, other than, wow, we don't want that to happen again. So we're going to do the work so that we can recognize that and see it. And we see life so very differently after that experience.
Yeah. It's a gift I never saw coming. And I think, that's one of those, again, it's, with writing the book, it is so personal. I, talk about things I never thought I would disclose publicly. And I also felt that if I didn't go to all of the crevices, how could I expect anyone to hey, go do your work, but I'm not going to do all of mine, or I'm not going to reveal all when I'm revealing so much. And so there's a few places in the book. I was talking to my dad yesterday and he was like, I can't believe that you put that out there. He's a slow reader. He's still getting there. I think, it's interesting because he's a fast reader, but with my book, he's really having to take his time as he.
Well, there's an emotional investment there, and it feels differently,
Yeah.
You had Dr. Keith Campbell work with you, assist you with some of this from that psychoeducation perspective in the book.
It was so life-giving. I think, as you know, and you experience this all the time, I'm sure, it's different when an expert, with someone with the actual knowledge base, tells you like they see it versus a family member. Sure. And it's not that my family didn't say, hey, this is unhealthy. It's different when a stranger, especially, when we initially met, when he, quickly shared some of his thoughts and feelings based on his research and what he's been studying for 30 plus years on narcissism. And it was just really, reassuring. I think that's, one of the things with, getting out of that second toxic relationship and being the one to leave, because in the first relationship, obviously he died tragically. So there wasn't me leaving. That's how that operated. So getting the strength to leave that following relationship, and then these business relationships where I was able to get myself out of them, those little moments, those God winks of reassurance. He was that for me. He was more like a beacon in that initial conversation. It was just really lovely to be able to, have the story, that firsthand account, because I think we do recall and remember so well when we have a story to tie it to. And then, to have the data and have the information and the how to and what does it mean? If you had said to me back in my 20s, someone that showers you with love and attention and this, that, and the other, I'd be like, that sounds great. I'd be like, no.
And now we know that it's red flag.
That is not, so certain things like that. It's incredible now what access is available to people of all ages, right? Those that have been in it and through it, like myself, and young people coming up, that they really have access to the understanding, and in a real way, not just a social media flippant way, in a real way. And that access is incredible.
I struggle with this idea of the access on social media, because in some way I love that people, especially younger people, are learning things aren't healthy.
Sure.
And so that part of it I love. The problem is sometimes the psychoeducation is very wrong, but I almost would rather at least there be an awareness that might create someone to be curious enough to want to go see an expert to get them to help them through understanding what's healthy or not. So often on this podcast, we talk about, what is healthy, and we even talk about a bill of rights in a relationship. And that's something I really push out often, to be able to show, these are basic fundamental things that should be present. And if they're not, that should be a red flag. And to even have the idea of these red flags and green flags and what people are looking for, I think is a concept that didn't exist a while back. And now it's so much more normalized. And that is the part I actually love. That is the part that's great, because that's growth, and that's going to allow more people to understand what they deserve and what they're worth and what they need. And, not fall prey to especially the gaslighting that is so pervasive over time,
Really. And I agree with you. I think that it's creating curiosity, which is a beautiful thing. And that normalcy of, this isn't so foreign. This isn't something we have to talk about behind closed doors. It also is concerning when you see versions of versions versus the firsthand account and experience. And there's a lot of regurgitation that is not correct. But I am really grateful for the curiosity, because I'm seeing how that's translating in beautiful ways, and hopefully will get corrected quickly in the ways that it's not.
Agreed. In your book, you talk about how to heal and how to get past that. Give us a little snapshot for listeners and viewers who haven't read it yet. I want them to understand how hopeful that is on the other side.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you felt like really got you to that place?
Yeah. Well, gosh, so many. But I would say the self-acceptance of what occurred. I think, when I was writing the book, I had never spent this much time in all of it, right? And there was so much that I hadn't addressed with myself. There's so much that I hadn't just said, that was really freaking hard and heavy. And I would check with my mom and my stepmom as kind of my okay, was this as bad? Check me. Am I remembering this properly?
Well, and when we have to ask the question, was that abuse? Was that bad? Is that, if we're having to ask that, that's a problem. And I love that you put some very heavy things in this book. You were very raw. And I think that's very helpful to people that can read that and see, oh, wow, I need to be taking some inventory of my life right now.
That self-inventory is so empowering. And and that was really life-changing, in that while I'm writing the book, I'm seeing things that I'd never really looked at before. And journaling has been such a gift. That's one of the places that, if someone doesn't know where to start, that's a great place to just start writing how you're feeling, because it exposes you.
It does.
To yourself in a way that is shocking sometimes and beautiful and heart-wrenching. And you're like, whoa, and your subconscious, once you start writing, you're not really thinking about, at least in my experience, I can't handwrite. I love writing by hand, but I criticize my
your penmanship.
My penmanship. So I start thinking about I'm writing like my dad, or I'm writing like my mom, or I'm writing like my stepmom. They have very distinct fonts.
You're too distracted.
I get distracted. So if I type, I can go into flow and not even be really thinking about what I'm writing, just write from the most honest place. And where it's just unjudged, I'm not critical of my handwriting. And it was so revealing to just take a step back from it and then go back and read what was going on. And just the transition from year to year in the process of, the album, which was kind of the first time exposing it, and then going into the book. And also, so that would be one thing that, man, that's just such a gift. And it's so personal, and it's sacred, and it's protected. Seeking out support and getting that accountability and confirmation, right? I think accountability is so important. And also understanding like where we're complicit and where we make our choices. And also, when we don't have the information, it's not our fault for not having the information. It's just now we have to get the information, right? And I'll tell you, I feel like now I just like trust myself. And for anyone that has an intuition, which is all of us, to be able to lean into our intuition and just start trusting yourself, it just gives you back so much time because you don't waste it trying to figure out what the other person is gaslighting about or hiding or this, that, or the other. If it doesn't feel right, I just move on. Whereas before I would, be like an investigator. I'd have to like get to the bottom of the reason and the this and the that, and poor Google,
It's one of those things where people talk about, the snake bites you. We don't go and find out and ask the snake why it bit us. We wouldn't do that. But yet in an unhealthy relationship, when we have that feeling of being bitten, that feeling of being hurt, it is very common that we're trying to seek out why and understand the why and try to address it in our mind. And that's when that healthy boundary comes in to say, this doesn't work for me. This isn't healthy for me. And I don't really need to know the why. It really doesn't even.
I love that metaphor because I'm from Montana and we have rattlesnakes. And that is such a great metaphor. If you get bit by a rattlesnake or a poisonous snake, you have to find a snake bite kit ASAP.
That's right.
Or you won't come out of it. And that's such a great, you just gave me the best visual of, I'm going to replay that for others. It's such a great, you don't go chasing the snake going, why'd you bite me? The snake would have said, I'm a snake. That's what I do.
We do so differently. If you're in that relationship, people will do that over and over and over again. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I think is easy for people to use as an inventory to see, well, am I trying to go back? Do I see something's happening and it's unhealthy? And all I'm trying to do is figure out the why and just see if I can change it and see if I can prove why you shouldn't have done that to me. And let me convince you why that was wrong. Let me convince you why that wasn't nice to do. If we're having to do that, if someone is in a relationship and that is the MO, it's extremely unhealthy. And
I love that.
That's not a foundation to build from because there's no accountability. And you're not having two people that are emotionally healthy working on a relationship. There's always conflict. Conflict is inevitable. But the difference is it toxic? Is it where there's no accountability? Is it where one person is doing all the trying? Is it that someone truly is manipulating you?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, was I like the queen of try? I'm like, oh, I'll get this right. No, you just stay toxic. I'll get better.
Right. You'll do all the changing to adjust to a toxic person.
Completely.
That's so right. True. But what I hear now when you're speaking and you're talking about this, I hear so much self-compassion for yourself in your voice. And I love that. It's one of the big things that I think that allows everyone to heal. If the moment we start deciding to love ourselves again, if you haven't, because you haven't been able to love yourself truly, if you're in a relationship that's unhealthy, because you're not putting yourself or your needs first, you're betraying everything about you for basically someone else. And
it's really ridiculous.
When we start to love ourselves and you start to recognize self-compassion and self-love is a game changer. And when that happens, it's kind of like our eyes are open. And I see you talking right now, and I can see that in the way that you speak about yourself. And that's a healing journey. That's like one of those milestones you reach when you're healing to recognize, wow, I feel differently about myself now. I can give myself grace. I can give myself compassion. I understand why I did what I did. I understood why I was there, why I endured it. I know all the reasons for me. And the why for that person doesn't even matter. They were unhealthy, they're toxic, that's their problem. I'm going to move on and now require different things in my life. I'm going to have different boundaries of what's healthy in my life.
Yeah, no, you're so right. And also the amount of shame that I carried and embarrassment, right? Because how many times I'm sure I heard, you're smarter than this. How did you let this happen to you?
Right. And that's what I said a moment ago when we were talking in the beginning, is that it's often viewed that somebody who's in a relationship that's unhealthy is meek and doesn't have a voice and isn't confident, and a very different picture than actually how it usually is. Because
Right.
it's what is a narcissist or a very toxic and unhealthy person, even on that axis. What are they looking for? They're looking for the traits that are represented that they do not possess. And
Right.
they're looking for someone that has a self-assuredness. They're looking for someone that feels confident about themselves, that is a bright light, as a counterbalance to what is very dark.
Yeah. Oh, it's just so interesting. Humans.
For
I
sure.
mean, and then the other side of the circle is, I have such, uh, just, I don't even know if empathy is the right word, but it makes me really sad for those that get to a place where they have to live in narcissism in order to exist, to have to live in that pathological, lying, just mess to get through the day. I that just sounds not only exhausting, but it's really heartbreaking. So to, peel back, obviously now as a, healed and forgiven and really forgiving myself, looking at through that lens of, man, what happened to these people to put them in or make them take on this armor and this persona to become so destructive.
And when I work with people to help them heal from these relationships, it's exactly what you're talking about. It is exactly that. And I think that to understand there's something so much more beautiful on the other side, and that someone who's in a relationship like that can experience and embrace a very different type of joy they've never experienced, and to feel compassion for themselves and love for themselves and grace for themselves.
Yeah.
And their life can be very beautiful and very different. And I think it's just a very scary thing when people decide to even embark on that journey, because it's very counterintuitive to what they've been living in for a long time.
Yeah. Well, and also we live so filtered now. We live in this version of ourselves through what we put out there a lot of times, that it makes sense to hide.
It does.
Because it's a lot more comfortable. But the short-term gain is not nearly as spectacular as just going to the stuff.
And we have to feel to heal. We've got to go to all that is repressed to be able to heal.
Yeah.
Something else that I wanted to mention, it was about when you're going through this process. I feel like I look at your life in these sections. At first you were in this relationship and then experienced this grief and this loss. And then you're in this toxic relationship that is so unhealthy. And then now you found a very different, beautiful, healthy relationship.
Yeah.
How do you look back at your life in this way and understand it's basically like living a few different lives?
It's so interesting that you just said this, because this was, kid you not, the conversation that I had with my husband this morning about these segments of my life. And I'm really grateful I'm still here.
But that's so beautiful for people who can't imagine something different than what they have now. Yeah. They can't imagine that there can be a transformation.
Yeah. And I really didn't think there could be, and I went to that edge, and I was on that edge emotionally. And I was so just filled with sorrow and sadness that I just wanted the pain to stop. And that was kind of that moment of must for me of, I have to figure this out, or this is going to take me out. And that part, yes, it's hard. And it is kind of a lone person. I'm not going to say lonely, because you become your best friend. In my case, I got to know myself and love the girl I saw in the really ugly fluorescent lighting. Like the one when you're at the gas station and you go into that bathroom, you're like, I don't want to look in this mirror right now because this lighting is so hideous.
I was thinking dressing room. Some of those
Oh, well,
dressing
see,
rooms
you're
where,
that,
where
yeah,
the
yeah.
light's so bad.
Oh man. And but still find something that picks something out that like, okay, that one hair on my head that's in the right place. We're just gonna love on that for a minute, And yeah, it's really interesting how one of the probably the biggest internal changes and external changes too is I'm a pretty outgoing person. I've been an extrovert driven type AAA person. And through this, I've fallen in love with being alone. And that's weird to say even out loud, to like love on that time when I'm by myself.
But when you're in a trauma bond, you can't do that. I mean, you cannot do that. If you are trauma bonded, being alone is a terrifying feeling of it triggers that abandonment. It triggers your nervous system is offline and completely, out of sorts, waiting for that next bit of that dopamine hit when breadcrumb comes, when things are going to be better. Yeah. And understand that there is something very different. And here you are living that. You're living in that way where you feel completely at peace. And that's the peace that everyone needs to be able to have in their life.
And it's doable. It's just not going to be comfortable getting there. And
I want to mention again for people who didn't see the beginning, Why Do We Stay by Stephanie Quayle. It's an amazing book that really highlights your experience. I want to kind of close with, what advice would you give to someone if they think, are suspecting they might be in an unhealthy relationship? What would you say to them?
Well, I'd say get your hands on this book for sure, because if there's something in there that feels relatable, sometimes we can't, talking to people sometimes can feel overwhelming at first, right? Sometimes reading someone else's story connects that dot. I would definitely say that. If I had had this book, I think I would have made a lot of different choices. I think my biggest thing is how do you feel about you when you wake up? Before anyone has influence over your day, how do you feel about you? When you first open your eyes, are you like, you know what? I think I like me today.
Mm-hmm.
This person's, we're not perfect, never gonna be, but I like me. And then from there, where and how are the influences? I think about that. I would never probably even let strangers be treated the way I was treated. I would never let my friends and family be treated the way I was treated. So going back to what you said, how are we taking care of ourselves? I am really good to my dog. I am really good to my basil plant. Gets water and sunshine every day. And so those questions, I think, are a great starting point.
I agree. I like that, because it's establishing this baseline or benchmark of how do I feel when it's just me before I've experienced everything else in a day. And how does that change? How does my viewpoint about myself change when I'm walking on eggshells, when I'm allowing someone else to influence how I feel in a day, when I'm, then no longer, I'm betraying all my own instincts, and instead I'm living for someone else. Well, what happens in that course of a day? I think that's a wonderful check and balance to really look at. I didn't mention your album, and I do want to touch on that too. On the Edge, because you chronicle a lot of this experience in that album as well.
I do. And it's chronological from the standpoint of the first song, 8 songs. So On the Edge, we just put out a deluxe album, which has some acoustic versions, and then a new song I wrote called Why Do We Stay to, go with the book. But it takes you through the lost years, which was the beginning, and then ends with the song Only Good Will Come of This, which were the words my mom said to me the day after the plane crash. And I just remember being like, Mom, how can you know? And she just said, I promise you only good will come of this. And so it's kind of bookended with, a time where I never told anyone the lost years. I just kind of said, oh yeah, it was just, I just existed for this time. And then to end with that, again, the hope. And with Why Do We Stay, the song, it's as if the book were a song. So I wanted to, and it was fun to write that after I wrote the book, because it kind of, if I had 3.5 minutes, if this was my elevator pitch of my book, I would just put on the song.
Put on the song. It explains it. But
Yeah.
life come full circle for you. And I really believe that it can become full circles for so many people. If you can just stop and really remember, that everyone deserves to have a joyful, healthy, beautiful life. And if that's not what's happening, it's time to take some inventory. It's time to do some work.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to link the album, the book, everything in our show notes so that our viewers and listeners can buy this book. Again, Why Do We Stay by Stephanie Quayle. And to find you, Stephanie Quayle, I think is your Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Spotify, everything. So
everything. All the places.
And with our guest questions. So every time people that listen to our podcast know that the prior guest leaves a question for a different guest, and then we continue on to pay it forward. Your question is, do you believe in an afterlife? And if so, what does that look like for you?
Yes, I do. I've been a woman of faith my whole life. So for me, it's, well, what does heaven look like to me? I would say it's Montana next to the ocean. I'm from Montana, born and raised. And it's just all of my friends and family and people throughout our lives. I think we get to see everyone, and it's just joyous, and horses are running, and all my dogs that went to heaven are all there. And it's just a really blessed place. And I get to see the handiwork of all of our lives through that, which is really, really special. I actually got water baptized on January 28th of this year to reclaim that day. And it's it's just joy.
I love hearing the joy from you. That's wonderful. All right. What question do you want to leave for our future guest?
Ooh, future guest. Golly. I want to know who your future guest is.
This is why it works.
This is why it's such a good question. It's such a good question. Ooh, I got one.
Okay, go.
Future guest. Your life in a song title, what would it be?
Ooh, that might be one of the most fun questions we've had. I can't wait to get that answer.
Oh, I can't wait to know. Do you have to share it with me later?
Oh, I will. We will be sure to pass it to you. All right. This has been wonderful. Thank you for coming on, Stephanie. Again, by the book, Why Do We Stay? Stephanie Quayle, the album On the Edge. Thanks for joining us today.
Appreciate you so much. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.